All right, good evening. It's 6 o'clock and October 12th, and this is the Education Committee meeting. Welcome to everybody here in the Cardinal Room and at home. We have a big presentation by our principals tonight, and we're very excited to see that and hear that. At the same time, our committee is lacking 2 of the members. So we will be discussing recommendations, but anything that gets moved to the legislative meeting will not be coming out of committee recommendations. The other piece that we'll get to when we get to the minutes, we'll move those to the next education meeting to get approved then, right? And I'd also like to have a special mention of Ms. Penner. This is, I believe, her last education meeting, and a lot of what we'll be hearing today are things that she, amongst many others, has worked on. So I'd like to specifically thank you for joining us tonight. And with that, I think we can move to announcements. Dr. Yanni.
We don't have any announcements this evening.
All right, so that gets us to the minutes. We'll skip the minutes of September 7th until the next education meeting, and that gets us right to the presentation.
So I'm actually going to kick us off tonight just to give some preliminary information. Yesterday, the Pennsylvania Department of Education dropped some data, which was a good thing because now we can see state averages so that we have a clearer picture of how our performance, our students' performance, compared to students across the state. So what the committee is going to hear tonight is how our students performed on the PSSAs and Keystones. Following this presentation, tomorrow on the website, there will be a data workbook that will show disaggregated data by subgroup and by building. At the elementary level, the disaggregated data will be shown as a combination of the 4 buildings because in some of our buildings, there are some groups of students that the N count, the number of kids in that subgroup, are so small that if we were to publish that data, it would be like putting individual student names on it. We'll also give you a look at how our students performed on the advanced placement exams last year, on the SATs and the ACTs. We don't have Keystone accountability data yet, so whenever students take the Keystone exams, their scores are banked until they're in 11th grade. The state still has some data quality issues that they're working through, so we don't quite have that yet. And we don't have our peer district data. So, we have peer districts in our county here. We also have peer districts in Chester County, in Delaware County, and in Washington County. So following this presentation, once we're able to get all of that information, we'll be bringing this presentation back to update the board. One of the things that folks from the Department of Education made clear yesterday was that overall, the Commonwealth saw a slight improvement in last year's scores over the previous year, as did we, but no one at the department has been able to see what they're calling a full rebound from before the pandemic. So they suggest not using Keystone and PSSA scores for high stakes decisions, and so the board knows that several years ago we stopped using those data points for high stakes decisions. It's also really important to note how low the participation rate was. So prior to the pandemic, districts were required to have 95% of students take the standardized assessment. Upper Dublin usually ranged anywhere between 98 and 100%. In some cases that we're going to see tonight, we're as low as 90, as 88 and 85%. So we do have a significant number of students that were opted out of the exam. The department also noticed the issue that we've been talking about for years, assessment fatigue. So if you're a student who takes algebra in 8th grade, you're taking the ELA PSSA, You're taking the math PSSA, you're taking the algebra Keystone, and you're taking the science PSSA. So an entire month of your school year is devoted to assessment. And the department really made clear that the opt-outs that we saw were much greater in math than in ELA or in science. So, yeah, thank you, Mr. Hoffman. If you go to the next, what you see here is a summary, a big picture of how our kids performed on the PSSAs. And we're not here to make this data look any worse or any better than it is. There are some areas that we're really struggling, and tonight the focus of the presentation is going to be on how we're moving from our current state to our ideal state. But there are a couple things that I want to point out that I think are worthy of mentioning. Once again, the state rate, the passing rate for the math PSSA is 34%. The department says that they cannot understand that other than the fact that we have rigorous standards. I think if any of our teachers consistently gave an assessment in our classrooms and the passing rate was 34%, we would want to look at that assessment. ELA, slightly more than 50% of the students across the state were proficient, and about a little less than 2/3 in science. As expected, we outpaced the state significantly. And as we go through tonight, the principals are really going to talk to us about what we're doing on a daily basis to operationalize our focus areas in our classrooms. The next slide, again, the Algebra 1 Keystone, 36.8%, and biology, fewer than half of students that took the assessment. It's important to keep in mind that over the next couple of years, there are students still matriculating through our school system that didn't take these assessments because they took trigger courses, Algebra 1 and biology, in years where there were no assessments. So these scores are going to look skewed for several years. Despite those looking skewed, we're still going to talk about what we're doing in our classrooms to improve student outcomes. And with that, we're going to throw it over to one of our elementary principals to talk about English language arts at the elementary level.
For the introduction. I'm going to talk a little bit about our ELA, our elementary English and language arts ideal state. That number, that 91, is a great number to focus on. Third graders, that's the percentage of our third graders reading at or above grade level. We would like to continue to improve on those numbers by using a consistent implementation of our K-5 writing framework that's been developed, using things like our writing workshop, mentor sentences, mentor text, common rubrics, writer's notebooks, and also looking at different genres of writing pieces and talking about the complete writing process with our students from a very early age. We'd also like to look at establishing very specific routines around effective planning of guided reading stations and specifically station rotations where students practice skills independently following direct explicit instruction. That is something that we are working with our teachers on every day in the classroom and will continue to do. We'd also like to work with our teachers to make sure that there's a consistent implementation of guided reading per our district guidelines that were established last school year. All students reading on or above grade level by the end of year 3 and making at least a year's growth for every year that they're in school is our ideal state. Now, how will we get there? By operationalizing our focus areas, specifically being very intentional about our focus areas for instructional support specialists, our ISS team, our reading specialists, making sure that we're looking at student data, looking at consistent integration of multiple choice assessments, giving students opportunities to have multiple choice assessments throughout the year to assess reading, looking at multiple tiered supports, How are we supporting our students? Looking at that data at our grade level monthly meetings, also looking at that through our curricular leader meetings, and monitoring progress of students. Continuing to use formative data to drive instruction, and we also would like to streamline our curricular leader roles, which we've done to collaborate and use a consistent implementation of our best practices and to have that conversation with our teachers every day. We'd also like to collaborate with student services to ensure that transitions between special education and education is happening, and as well as prioritizing our professional development times with our ISS teachers and our looking at specifically our K-5 writing framework and also our reading goals that I spoke about earlier. Now going to talk about math.
Actually, if I just want to make a few comments.
Sure.
I know this is the principals, but I'm not going to be able to stay quiet during these data presentations. One of the things that we did this year, we looked at our curriculum leader model, and instead of having curriculum leaders in every building at the elementary level, we have curriculum leaders by grade level. That's really important because cross-building collaboration is going to be more important now than ever. If you look at the Fort Washington ELA scores, Fort Washington outpaced our other buildings in ELA. So part of the value of having those grade level specific curriculum leaders, during that collaboration time, we're having conversations about what did we do at Fort Washington that worked that may or may not have been done in the other buildings. It doesn't mean that anyone did anything wrong, but when we look, for example, in 5th grade, the spread is 90.2% of our kids at Fort were proficient, and at Thomas Fitz, we were 69.3. What is it, or what were the conditions that existed in those classrooms at Fort Washington that we need to replicate and even make better year over year so that kids have more of a common experience across our 4 schools?
In addition to Dr. Yanni, the curriculum leaders, we also have the instructional support specialists that are now, rather than building specific, we have a K2 humanities and a K2 STEM and a 3-5 humanities and 3-5 STEM that also will be working across the district in these areas.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hamer. Good evening, Board of School Directors and our executive leadership team. It's my pleasure to speak about elementary mathematics. So when we look at mathematics, and really anytime we're talking about raising achievement, obviously we're looking at standards, and what we've been able to do is identify some of our own priority standards, looking at our state standards, and yet we'll see in the next slide when we talk about assessments and aligning and building assessments around those standards. We're working with our teachers with assessment and really how we're doing the day-to-day, the formative assessment, and how we're responding to that with some of our flexible groupings in our classrooms. Just like Dr. Hamer spoke about guided reading, being able to have some of those guided math groups in our classroom, and really teaching kids what it means to write about mathematics. Overall, we list here teacher efficacy with mathematics, and what we're talking about in terms of our standards is being able to really unpack those standards and what that means to be comfortable with those standards, not only knowing them, but then what does that look like with the learning targets and the things that we're doing specifically in our classrooms. And what we have here at the bottom is obviously when we're talking about achievement, we want to see kids achieving, and our ultimate goal is by the end of 5th grade that our students, 100% of them, are proficient in math, but we're also looking to make sure that kids are growing in math. We have students that are proficient and advanced already, and we want to make sure we're continuing to grow those students as well, and that's extremely important. So we talk about operationalizing our focus areas. Right now, we are breaking down our data. We've been doing that, and when we talk about, again, our priority standards, we have to make sure that these standards are aligned with our curriculum, and they're aligned with our common assessments. So we talk about having data protocols in place at grade level meetings. This summer, we had an opportunity to try out some of that protocol with our own team at our retreat, and we're looking to follow that with our teachers and implement that. We also list here our first in math because it's critically important for us to make sure our kids are getting explicit practice with number sense and also our targeted areas here. And we always are looking to have creative DS projects available for our teachers so that we can absolutely focus on the current resources that we are using and how they're aligning to our priority standards. We've done some work with our ISSs, so we have the power of 4 ISSs now, our instructional support specialists, in 4 buildings. And we're able to really have from K to 2 and 3 to 5 and utilize those ISS professionals in 4 buildings so that we can get the best of all of them and see what we're doing and what's working well in buildings and what we can share and utilize. And then we also talk about our walkthroughs by our leadership team members. As we spoke about earlier, our curriculum leaders, we had our round of curriculum leader meetings today by grade level, done very well, a lot of positive feedback from our teachers with that piece. And then we also have here certainly our collaboration with our student services office, because it's really, really important when students are receiving replacement instruction that there are pathways to get back to the grade level curriculum, and that we're bridging that gap for our students and closing that as quickly as possible for our students. I'm going to hand the microphone over to Mr. McAleer.
How's everybody doing? I get the forgotten subject sometimes is science. I think a lot of time we put a lot of effort into math and reading, and sometimes science, social studies gets left behind. So I think as a district, over the past 10 years, well, we did a lot of work with UBD on science, and we have that K through 5. For the PSSAs, only grade 4 is tested in science, and we tend to do very well as a school district in science. They talked about our curriculum leaders. I was able to sit in on some of the meetings today. I was in 1st grade and 4th grade, and they were looking at the blueprint of how science looks and how math looks and how social studies looks. And I kind of focused in on science, and we're looking, what's nice about these meetings is that sometimes there's inconsistencies in buildings. I think if you've been a teacher, you know that sometimes it's something like science, teachers kind of stray away and can sometimes do their own thing. And we're trying to bring in some consistent assessing with that. What we had some conversations on also is sometimes in different grade levels, they're teaching standards that might be. So for example, there's electricity we're seeing taught in 3rd grade, and it's a standard in 4th grade, and kind of making some movement there. But looking at the ideal state indicators, all staff members developing a STEM mindset for integrating science concepts in novel ways. Chris Mishner's been great in helping with that. He's working with some high school students coming down to the elementary schools and teaching some lessons and aligning them with state standards. Reverse curricula aligned to the new PA state standards, and using our ISS teachers during grade level meetings to really focus on those state standards. I think sometimes we get stuck on our curriculum, and we have to step back sometimes and really look at what we should be teaching in the state standards. Implementation of inquiry and phenomena-based approach to science education, and student growth on PSSA science assessment, which we do a good job on. All students demonstrating at least proficiency on PA state standards as evidenced by the PSSA. And then the operationalizing our focus areas, kind of similar to what you're hearing in math and reading. Attendance of staff and at science leadership conferences for understanding of the new PA standards. And the good thing is, for those that do attend it, then sharing that back within the grade level meetings, and then at those monthly meetings for all teachers in the same grade level. I'm not going to read that big one there. I think you can all read it. I can't see it well with my glasses. Outline and identify STEM resources for each grade level through library curriculum. And obviously, with our work with Dr. Betty Webb is walkthroughs. I think sometimes we find ourselves really focusing on reading, and I think there's a big push this year for we need to get in there for math, and we need to get in there for science. So that's where we are in science right now. Thank you.
I have a couple points I want to make about the science assessment. So with all due respect to those folks that created the science assessment at the state level, it definitely does assess some science content. However, you have to be able to read the questions. And so the reading level, when we take the released items from the science PSSA and we run them on a Lexile scale, what we tend to see is that the readability of those questions is typically above a fourth grade reading level, which means kids have to fight through some of that language to be able to answer questions. What we've not been able to figure out, and this has been a phenomenon not just here in Upper Dublin, but across the state, our fourth graders outpace ELA in science, but without being able to read and access, they wouldn't be able to answer the science questions. So that's something that we're digging into. We obviously have kids that are able to attack language that's unfamiliar. So why aren't they able to do that? So the question becomes, why aren't they able to do that in ELA? So then we drill down into the ELA data. Where are we the strongest? In text-dependent analysis questions, where kids have to write about what they're reading. So they're able to write complex responses to fiction and informational text, and we're outpacing the state on average by 3 to 4 points. Where we're falling down in ELA is in fiction texts, and when you look at the released items that come from PDE, the majority of fiction texts used on the PSSA are contrived texts, so they're not real-life texts. They were written in a vacuum. They're not pulled from a real short story, they're not pulled from a novel, they're not an excerpt of anything. So when Dr. Hamer talks about assessing kids throughout the year using some multiple choice questions, we owe it to kids to be able, we owe it to them to practice answering some kinds of those questions. And one of the things that we love about FPC is the authentic texts that we use all the time. Unfortunately, that also hinders us a little bit because when they encounter contrived texts, our kids aren't doing as well. Overall, at the elementary, 2 groups of students saw the greatest gains over last year. Our students with IEPs saw the greatest gains, and our Black and African American students saw the greatest gains. So when we disaggregate that data, while there's still a gap there that we have to address, those 2 groups saw the most improvement. When we think about our students with IEPs, we've done a much better job of not taking kids with IEPs off core curriculum. And that's something that Dr. Blankman and her team will continue to stress as we move through this year. So with that, I think we're going to now turn it over to middle school. So Dr. Ortiz.
Good, great. We almost got off to a smooth start.
He made sure that the 936 kids transitioned into the building well this year. How about just hold that?
Sounds good. Sounds good. All right. Good evening, everyone. It's great to see you all. So over the next few minutes, I think that you will see some similar themes as to what my elementary colleagues just spoke about. And I hope that that isn't in the spirit of redundancy, but instead making sure that we provide our kids with a consistent K-12 experience, right? So you will hear some themes reiterated throughout. To start with middle school English and ELA, we're staying consistent with our goal of having 100% of our students reach proficiency in both reading and in writing. But also, as some of the elementary principals talked about, there's a renewed and continued focus on showing growth for all of our students in monitoring their progress 3 times a year throughout the year to make sure that when these end-of-year high-stakes tests come, that they're not a surprise to anyone, and that we have check-ins throughout the year, and that we're able to build in some supports and interventions along the way. So with that, we can transition to how we're supporting our students in English and language arts in grades 6 through 8. Working with Ms. Vandegrift, our team of curriculum leaders and other teacher leaders, we've already begun the creation of grade level benchmarks in both reading and in writing. Those benchmarks can be delivered in a number of ways, and as I mentioned before, delivered several times throughout the year, so that we're not just relying on marking period report cards or May PSSA data. We want more accurate real-time data provided to teachers so that they can adjust their instruction and provide interventions along the way. Our teacher leaders and our curriculum leaders have also begun some work with Linkit, doing some data analysis training. Linkit also provides some diagnostic tools as well to make sure that we're keeping up to date and monitoring our students' progress. So that data training has begun, and it's going to become a continued point of emphasis throughout the year, not only in department meetings, but in building-wide collaboration time meetings as well. This past spring, some of our teachers in the special education department partnered with teachers in our English department to ensure those smooth on-ramps so that students can get back into our regular education curriculum as seamlessly and as quickly and as appropriately as possible. We saw some real positive growth back in the spring, and that's something that Ms. Seiberling, Dr. Blankman, and I are hoping to continue throughout the year as well. We're going to continue an ongoing process of reviewing and revising our common assessments, ensuring that our rubrics are aligned to state level standards, ensuring that we have greater reliability, and doing some calibration within our teaching staff, again, to make sure that that student experience and the student outcomes are consistent across the board. So we're really excited about some of the work that's already begun. It is an ongoing process to tackle ELA and Sandy Run.
If I could just jump in here for a second, if you look at the P rate, so in 6th grade, 92.5% of our students took the assessment. We were just below 90 in 7th grade, and roughly 20% of our students in 8th grade did not take the assessment. And so, when we look at, when I looked at this data initially, I looked at 81%, and that's a little bit low for 8th grade because we typically see 8th grade top out at the middle school, typically do a little bit better than that. When we actually then were able to see the participation rate and knowing that an entire fifth of the class didn't take the assessment, we pushed back at PDE and said, what can we really extrapolate about our curriculum when we have 20% of our kids that don't take the assessment? And across the Commonwealth, participation was down about 17%. And so while we're looking at all of these data points to look at what's strong in our curriculum and what needs to be potentially revised, we're also looking at the kids that didn't take the assessment, looking at our local assessments, and trying to project if they did take the assessment, how would they have fared on the assessment?
That 8th grade P rate is a good number to look at. The assessment fatigue mentioned at the beginning of the slideshow probably is more of a factor in 8th grade than maybe any other grade. Not only are they taking the 8th grade English PSSA, it's the 8th grade science PSSA, 8th grade math, and more than half of our students are also taking the Algebra 1 Keystone exam, all within a 5-week period. So there's a lot there at the end of the spring. So for math, similar to ELA, we're staying consistent with our goal of having 100% of our students proficient by the end of 7th grade. We're also maintaining our goal of having students show growth from assessment to assessment as well, so that regardless of what our achievement scores are, whether they're wherever they are, we want to ensure that all 100% of our students are growing from year to year and within one school year as well. A shift and a prioritized conversation that we've had over the past few years is, how do we think about math? How do we consider our mathematics curriculum and instruction? And we want to ensure that as our classrooms prioritize the mathematical thinking over the algorithms. And that's a shift, that's a challenge for some of our students and maybe even for some of our staff members, because it may be different than the way that we were taught. But that mindset, that philosophy is an important one, and it's one that is really supported with our work with illustrative math that I'll touch on in just a second. And similar to the conversation I just had about English language arts partnering with student services, we're having the same conversations in mathematics as well, just ensuring that students who may have a math disability have easy access and are prepared to be successful back in the regular education curriculum. So how do we operationalize this in mathematics? Continued curricular alignment, not only with the state standards, but with illustrative math, which is obviously aligned to our state standards. We've done a lot of close partnership this year, and big thanks to Chris Michner for helping to organize and facilitate much of this. But we've partnered very closely with Faith Muirhead and other members from the University of Delaware in assisting us in that implementation of illustrative math. The conversations there have been really rich and fruitful. Faith pushes us, we push back. It's great conversation, it's great growth for our staff to ensure that we're continuing to implement illustrative math 6 through 8 with fidelity, and that our kids are really benefiting as a result of that. So we actually have a session with Faith to come up and partner with our teachers, with our administration to do walkthroughs tomorrow for a full day session at Sandy Run. So we're thankful to Faith, we're thankful to Mr. Michner for that work and for that ongoing professional development. It's been really, really fruitful. I mentioned in the slide earlier about data training and analysis. Again, we have some staff members who've had some really extensive experience in Linkit and other data analysis tools. We're using our district-wide data analysis procedures just to ensure that we're constantly looking at how our kids are doing and what can we do in the classrooms to ensure that we're meeting their needs ongoing. I mentioned IM a few times. That has been a really good start to the year in the classroom. We're also using diagnostic tools that partner and pair nicely with IM. Diagnostic tools such as IXL, EasyCBM, some other tools in there so that we can get that ongoing formative assessment to understand how our kids are doing in real time. And finally, in science.
Wait, before you move on, I just want to make a few comments. Several years ago, when we worked to eliminate tracks at middle school, our 8th graders take algebra in no later than 8th grade. We really led the way in the county on that. Over the last couple of months, folks have reached out, am I correct, Mr. Hoffman? Reached out, and other districts now are making that their goal. The challenge, and this is a good challenge to have. We believe strongly that illustrative mathematics provides the right framework to teach mathematics, because every lesson is predicated upon floor and ceiling problems. That means there's a point of entry in every lesson for every student. So when we talk about the implementation of equitable practices, every student can be successful inside an illustrative math lesson. And that's why we're putting the resources behind our continued collaboration with the University of Delaware. I always get this backwards, so I'm going to ask Mr. Hoffman in just a second to explain this, or maybe Mr. Michener. If you want to punt it over to him, that's fine. Illustrative mathematics requires kids to think in exactly the opposite way that Eureka Math requires kids to think. So, Mr. Michener, do you want to come up to the microphone? This was not planned, so there's no pressure. Absolutely no pressure.
Yeah, and in my discussions with Faith, who's been great in helping us with the middle school illustrative math implementation, she explained that Eureka Math really approaches from an algorithm standpoint, learn various algorithms and then pick the one that works best, whereas illustrative math focuses on uncovering the math behind it and then gets to the algorithm. And so it's been really interesting working with 6th, 7th, and 8th grade teachers, 9th grade Algebra 1 here at the high school as well. You know, it's a new way of teaching math for those teachers in a lot of ways. But when you walk into the classroom, the energy in the room is just different. And we were going to have another day tomorrow, but Faith, unfortunately, is sick and can't get here tomorrow. But she's going to come in a couple times a month and work with our teachers in a coaching cycle, and so far, positive returns.
I don't want anyone to misinterpret what I've said. What I said was not a dig against Eureka. When we talk to 6th grade math teachers in particular, the big change that they've seen over the last 5 years, 6 years, 7 years that we've had Eureka is kids come to 6th grade math with deeper understanding of complex concepts. But what we're seeing now as our 6th graders have to make that shift in thinking, it's creating a little bit of dissonance, and we're having to level set. When we looked at math programs, I believe it was my first year, Mrs. Sherpier was in some of those meetings. We were really excited about illustrative because it's not a program, it's a framework, and they didn't have an elementary framework at that time. The thing that's also really exciting is there are overlays for English language learners, and there's overlays for support. And when you look at those overlays for English language learners, a lot of it is direct, explicit instruction around vocabulary. And as I've said many, many times before, the best way to ensure educational equity is to provide direct, explicit instruction in vocabulary. So being able to think of illustrative mathematics potentially as our framework, K through Algebra 1, is going to put kids on a better trajectory because it creates a common vocabulary, it creates a common language, and it creates a common experience. And that's why we're particularly thankful for the board's support of our collaboration with the University of Delaware. I would love, I'm not gonna lie, our trainer from the University of Delaware, she's a little bit scary. She's a little bit more blunt than the superintendent. But I think at some point it would be great to have her come and talk, maybe at an education committee, about the work that we're doing, because she'll be able to provide some real examples.
And lastly, for middle school at least, our science ideal state indicators. So just for background, eighth grade PSSAs, science PSSAs are only offered in 8th grade at the middle school level. And we continue to be committed to having a goal of 100% of our 8th graders reach proficiency in science, as well as demonstrating growth throughout their middle school years. Science has really been an exciting area of growth over the first month of the school year for a number of different reasons, but we've really adopted a different way of approaching and thinking about science, not only in our science courses, but across different content areas. Through some professional development offered through the IU, and even one that's coming up later on in October, along with some early work in a differentiated supervision project around STEM education, we've really been able to integrate those ideas, that theme, those philosophies of STEM education and an inquiry-based approach, not only in our science classes, but across the other content areas also. Early on, all 3 of our grades have already had some really exciting opportunities in our STEM lab in the new facility. Obviously, an opportunity that we couldn't quite offer last year, and that's allowed us to really expand our thinking, expand our approach to science education, and really allow students to be scientists there in the classroom. So we're excited about what we've already done. We're excited to build off of that through some in-house professional development as well as through a partnership with the IU. We're also, and lastly, we're also reviewing our curriculum to ensure that we're properly aligned with the new PA science standards, the next-gen science standards that really tackle that difference in how we think about science. Kids are excited about it. Mr. Michener talked about the energy around some of the illustrative work in math. I think we're seeing some of the same energy around that inquiry-based approach to our science lessons early on in this school year as well. So we're excited to see what the outcomes of that will be, and we're confident that it will result in some really good growth for our students moving forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Schultz and the high school.
Thank you, Dr. Ortiz. Thank you, members of the ELT and the board for the opportunity tonight. So as we transition from middle school to high school, the high school indicators are going to be similar, but clearly put, we want all of our students to reach that level of proficiency. We want all of our students to grow over the course of time in the high school. So we're looking to see what kind of growth scores we get. And then drilling down a little bit on that, we also want to make sure that they're demonstrating growth within a course, thus the creation of and the implementation of benchmark exams so we can see that growth kind of in the micro level versus the macro level. So how are we operationalizing that in English? Well, through the expertise of Ms. Vandergrift, our department head, Mr. Scalici, our house principal, Ms. Martonic, and then just a department that is kind of getting after it. They are working together right now on creating benchmark assessments in both 9th and 10th grade. And having moved to IXL this year, that is a platform in which we've had some professional development, and they've begun to create those assessments. Why do you create the assessments? So that you can analyze the data, form your instruction, and look to see what changes might need to be made, and look to see what specific support students will need so that they can have success moving forward. We have a partnership with our Student Services Department. Dr. Blankman has had a number of shout-outs so far tonight. I'll continue to give them. It has been great working with her. We look forward to that continued partnership. We are thrilled to have Ms. Edelman on board as well, and has been stated before, when students are in a more restrictive environment, we need to make sure that our regular education classes are aligned to those courses so that when they are ready to join, they're hitting the ground running and they can have the most success possible. In terms of professional development, one thing that we've done this year was some creative scheduling that might just be the brainchild of our soon-to-be dearly departed Ms. Penner. We have a couple of specialists in our building whose schedules we were able to free up so that they can provide push-in support. They're not specifically aligned to a teacher in a co-taught environment, but they can push into various classes. They can help with students. They can help with lesson design. They can help with accommodations and modifications. They can do demo lessons. But that partnership through both special ed and with a reading specialist is not just in English, but we've already seen some great fruit from that, and we're looking to continue that work, and we're very pleased with the results so far. As we now transition over to math, the first two commitments are the same. We ultimately want all of our students to demonstrate proficiency in Algebra 1, noting that many of our students are going to take that exam in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. We want all of them to demonstrate it, and that will continue to be our ideal. Again, we're looking to see growth over the course of their high school experience, and part of the data analysis that we're promoting both in department time and in collaboration time is analyzing the results that we get from the preceding grade level, looking for areas of need, looking for areas of strength, and then designing instruction accordingly. As Mr. Michener so eloquently put, and I won't even take a shot at trying to repeat what he said, we are looking to promote mathematical thinking over algorithmic mathematics. We want our students to have that conceptual and deep understanding, and we then need to look for ways in which we can provide assessments in which they demonstrate that knowledge. So as we operationalize that, we are working closely with our teachers of our various courses to promote consistency, to make sure that we are looking at a standards-based approach, and to make sure that assessments, not just the midterms and the finals, are much more consistent and are common throughout the year. When we talk about walkthroughs, when we talk about look-fors, and a couple of pieces on this operationalizing that are kind of combined there, we're looking to see that the standards are being met and then the learning targets are properly aligned. We're looking to see that the activities that are given and are conducted with the students have student leadership, have student empowerment, but most importantly, have student engagement so that they are having the best chance to immerse themselves in the topic and to demonstrate success in it. How do we know that they've demonstrated success? That's the third part of the look for. We want to make sure that we see some degree of formative assessment that is informing instruction and thus helping all of our students who are at various levels. Again, we're working closely with Dr. Blankman and Ms. Edelman with the alignment with student services. And when we talk about mathematics, we have Algebra 1, I'll say through BC Calculus at the high school. So if a student is not yet ready for that when in the high school, we need to make sure that those courses that they're taking provide them with the depth of understanding through pre-algebra so that they can transition the most seamlessly. And then we're committed to expanding our course offerings. I guess getting back to data analysis, we have included a course this year called Math Lab, which is a semester-based class which provides an opportunity for students to receive. It could be pre-teaching, it could be reteaching, it could be, hey, these are some areas that you've shown coming into the high school or coming in from your last class that need additional support, or it can be very much on-time support, and the IXL platform has allowed us to target that both in the regular classroom, but again in this math lab to give our students what they need. And then as we finally talk about high school science, 100% proficiency, all students showing growth, all classes committed to inquiry, committed to that phenomena-based, that observational-based classroom platform. Our teachers do a wonderful job of that, and thankfully the work of Mr. Mitchner alongside Mr. Smith and Mr. Chang, who is our house principal that oversees that area, they are providing professional development both within the school, during PLE days, during department opportunities, and allowing all of our students to collaborate to work toward that. So we've talked before about making sure that we're aligned to standards, continuing to develop common assessments. We had a teacher today participate in professional development at the MCIU. We're looking for him to provide turnaround training, and I know there's some other professional development coming up down the road that we want to implement. Our teachers in the biology department in particular do a great job with classroom diagnostic tests. In math and language arts, they're using IXL this year. They're using the CDTs in biology, and those teachers do a really, really nice job of something I've said before, taking the data that they have coming in from the middle school and making sure that they're targeting their lessons and their groupings accordingly to take care of all the students. And then one final time, and then I'll stop shouting her out because she's 3 feet from me. We're really pleased with the collaboration that we have with Dr. Blankman, and that is to the benefit of all of our students. So final slide, at the high school, when you talk about standardized testing, after you talk about keystones, you have APs, you have SATs, and you have the ACTs. You see that open enrollment started last year with AP exams. You see that we have an increased number of students taking them, an increased number of exams taken, and then you see the percentage of students who got the 3 or above, which can give them college credit. With SATs, you don't see an N on those numbers. We have seen a drop-off of late with the number of students that are taking the SAT and the ACT because a lot of the colleges aren't really requiring them any longer. But for the second time in 3 years and the second time in 6 years, the combined score for the SAT was over a 1,200. And then the ACT, I've already mentioned N, the composite score of 28.0. I think I'm saying this accurately. I believe that's the highest score the high school has ever achieved. I think it's the first time they've ever hit 28. So it's not just over those 6 years. So that's the high school data, and I guess I'm turning this back over to Dr. Yanni.
So I'm going to give Mr. Hoffman just a few seconds to think about what he wants to say about an exciting data portal that we have coming available for parents. What you heard tonight was part of the picture that we'll be providing to the board over the next couple of months. So at the beginning of the presentation, we said that what we have is our raw data, and we have a data workbook that will go live tomorrow on our website. We are interested in looking at our peer data, mainly to see how we fared compared to some of those districts. And when you look at the districts that are there, for those of you that are having a hard time seeing them, Pine Richland and Upper St. Clair in Allegheny County, Downingtown and Great Valley in Chester County, Radnor and Wallingford, Swarthmore and Delaware County, Montgomery County, Lower Marion, Lower Moreland, and Wissahickon, and in Washington County, Peters Township. So just as a reminder, those peer districts have the same SES, socioeconomic status, as Upper Dublin. We need to see how we fared when we get the accountability scores for Keystone, so the banked scores. And then for the first time in a couple of years, the state is going to release their PVAS data. So PVAS shows us, did kids grow a year's worth, did they make a year's worth of growth in a year's time? And if they didn't, we need to dig into why that didn't happen. And so I would hope that we're back with you for an update in November, but it may be more like December or January by the time we get all of this data. There were a couple things mentioned tonight that I just want to point out. Mr. Hoffman and I changed the way that we're meeting with the principals, and I want everyone to look at the principals and see how excited they are when I explain how we meet with them this year. We now have what we call triad collaboration. So Mr. Hoffman and I meet with each principal at least monthly. The purpose of that triad collaboration is to make sure that Mr. Hoffman and I, along with the principal, we're on the same page academically, so that we're constantly looking at a number of data points. We're looking at how kids are performing on letter grades. We're looking at how kids are performing when we do EasyCBM, our benchmark data, when we do our common assessment data, so that we can then work with the building and their MTSS teams and intervention teams to provide more timely support for kids that might need it. We're also looking for any student that might be in danger of not passing a marking period or passing a course. Last year, the board knows when we revised our graduation requirement policy, we said that we would do everything in our power to make sure that kids graduate. So that's one of the pieces we put in there. When we looked at our equity policy, we talked about the idea that results matter. And so you might have great intent. So what you heard tonight a lot about was how we're moving from our current state to our ideal state. So we have a lot of great intentions, but what's going to be important is that the results come along with those intentions. And so periodically throughout the year, unlike in other years, the board will get updates. So when we do our EasyCBM benchmark data, we're going to bring a report to the board. When we do common assessment data, we're going to bring, and I don't want you to think we're going to hit the board with just a ton of data, but meaningful points of data so that you're informed as well as we're informed as we move throughout the year. And before I let Mr. Hoffman jump in, I'm sorry. There are two things were mentioned tonight, IXL, and IXL makes some people think about Alex. So we have long talked about computer-based interventions, computer-based instruction in the district. When we talk about IXL is used for, it's an adaptive piece of software that students use. Because it's adaptive, at certain times during the year, we can pull data that gives us diagnostic data that we can use, that teachers can use in classrooms the next day to change the trajectory of students' performance. So when you hear IXL, We trained our administrators this summer, we trained our teachers at the end of the summer, and teachers are using it. The feedback from kids is that it is not as laborious as some of the ALEKS work they were doing in the past, and I think we're better able to pull real-time data. So, Mr. Hoffman.
So I'll be bringing some information to the board next month at Ed Committee about Linkit parent portal, but you've heard us mention Linkit. You've seen some Linkit reports over the last few years. Linkit is our data management system for where we house all of our student assessment data. Some of our teachers at the high school last year began piloting, Ms. Penner, just high school, right? The high school last year began piloting actually giving some of their in-class assessments in the Linkit tool. And the benefit of giving those assessments in our Linkit tool is that it allows us to triangulate some of that data with other data that we have, and it also allows us to run reports by certain groupings of kids, by subgroups of students, et cetera, so that we can see what our assessment, our common and local assessment practices look like. And so over the next few weeks, we have PLE on professional learning on October 24th and October 31st. Our teachers will be collaborating on creating some assessments together and potentially using Linkit as an option for that, so that we can, as our principals have shared, those common district-wide grade level and department collaboration times, they can be analyzing our local data. One of the things that I'll be presenting to you all in November is the parent portal option. And what that's going to be for parents K-12 is access to local assessment data for their students. This is part of our strategic Vision 2025, where we have very specific, if you recall, I don't remember if it was June or September, when we presented the three-pronged approach to meeting those reading, math, and writing goals. And this parent portal will help give parents a snapshot of where their students are in terms of meeting those district goals as individual parents and individual students. This can also, as we get used to using Linkit as a parent resource, it also can be somewhere that teachers are utilizing that portal to share additional local assessments. We're really excited about that. It does give us the ability, we've been using Linkit to look at I won't call Chris back up, but the triangulation and correlation of predictors for the EasyCBM and PSSA and et cetera. And there is a correlation in our various assessment points to see them as predictors and also matches for those performance levels.
All right, thank you so much for all this information. There's a lot to go through, and I really appreciate all of our presenters and all their team members who are represented here, even if they didn't speak. But there's a lot of work that's going on, and I think we now will open it up for questions. Ms. Iannetti?
All right, I have a few questions. So when we talk about peer districts, what else goes into it besides SES?
Because SES is the best predictor of student achievement, that's primarily what we look at. We also do compare against all districts in Montgomery County, but so when you see that data, I'll make sure that you see how we look in Montgomery County and then how we look.
Is it also like the size of the school? Is that part of it or no?
It's not really
No?
it's not really the size of it.
When you talk about the third graders, 91% or at level, so I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So are you gathering data on the 9% to figure out what might be?
So that's the beauty of how we're looking at data this year, using Linkit. We can now target the 9 that aren't, like the 9% that aren't. And so we know, we flag those kids so that as we're meeting with principals, now we're saying, okay, where are we as a whole grade level? But now where are we with these kids that we knew at the end of last year, what the 9% that weren't reading on grade level? So then we're having conversations about them, wanting to know what kind of interventions they're getting. Are they meeting with a reading specialist? Are they getting double dose of guided reading? Are they getting phonemic awareness help? So that as we move through the year, then we're sure we're moving those kids. And even though we're talking about specifically here 3rd grade, to be on or above grade level at the end of 3rd grade, we really need kids to be on or above grade level in kindergarten, 1st, and 2nd. So our view of data is now getting us to such a point that even when there's something really good to celebrate, the 91%, we can really intensely focus on the kids that are not there yet.
And are you able to see in that data if those students have anything in common? That maybe that's why they're in that 9%.
Yes, and we've been talking as a team. So the BAS assessment is one of the areas that we use to help inform this number. And now that our teachers are and our specialists are really getting adept at assessing using that method, we'll also be doing some refreshers in that at the end of this month. We're looking to link it as an option that we won't only put if students in H, but what indicators specifically. Meredith rattled off 5 the other day, and I'm not going to try to do that. But 5 areas of reading that we might want to indicate as a goal area for that student, so that when we're grouping students, we're not just looking at how are we bringing the H's up, but how are we bringing the students that are having decoding issues together to practice some decoding strategies.
And typically when we look at kids that are not reading on grade level, because we look at the entire population of students, we may have a student or two that have significant disabilities that they may not even be verbal. But there are also a number of students in that 91% that we've done a really good job with foundations, with phonemic awareness and phonics and K1-2. And they're really good with literal comprehension and interpretive comprehension. When they come to evaluative comprehension, what's the author's purpose? Or they're having to draw conclusions or make inferences based upon text clues that aren't explicit, that's where our students are struggling. So knowing that, then we build that into Tier 1 instruction so that we can strengthen it for everybody, but make sure that we target that weakness for the students as well.
You want to take a turn? No, go ahead. Okay, so Bob Schultz did a great job describing the walkthroughs. So I'm wondering, how long are you in there, and do the teachers know you're coming?
So teachers don't know we're coming, so walkthroughs are unannounced. It was interesting, several years ago, we'd walk into a classroom and the teachers would stop and they'd say, oh, can we help you? And now it's just become part of the culture. So usually anywhere between 10 and 15 minutes, depending upon what's going on, especially if there's going to be a transition from one activity to the next, or teachers are moving from maybe at the high school lecture into some small group. And so far this year, we've been just leaving informal feedback. But now as we develop people, our folks on Act 13, the new evaluation and supervision procedures, we will once again restart those formal walkthroughs. And with the formal walkthroughs, teachers get specific feedback. So it's objective. Here's what we saw. Here's what was going on in your classroom. Here's some questions that you might want to reflect on. And I'm going to come back in a week or two to see if some of the things that maybe you were struggling with or kids were struggling with, if they improved or not. And then we're actually able to use that data to build professional learning for small groups of staff based upon what we're seeing in observations.
So math lab at the high school. Can anyone take it? And what are the parameters there? Like even if you have a high achiever that wants to achieve more?
Yes, anybody can take Math Lab. It was built for that purpose. of students going from Algebra 2 into a course and wants to just really build some of those foundational skills going into the course. It was built for students that were leaving Algebra 1 in 8th grade but might just need a little bit of extra structure and support. It was built for students that are going to be enrolled in a geometry class but might want to be in a class that they can get a little bit of extra geometry support. Sometimes with language, we find as Dr. Yanni said, with vocabulary and language, that's an important piece. So that course can almost pre-teach and support. And we also shifted the order, allowed for a shift of order for program of studies this year, that you could go Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, to build up on that Algebra 1's course content during geometry in preparation for Algebra 2 in 10th grade. So we have a wide range of people taking the class. We have, how many sections? 7, somewhere between 5 and 7 sections of it. It was a really popular class. We weren't sure what the numbers are going to look like, and we're really pleased with it. The teachers are really doing a great job with our students.
So when I first heard about Math Lab, I bristled a little bit because it made me think of a remedial course. And so one of the things that we've committed to is we are not going to create classes where we see overrepresentation of historically underperforming students. And it's really great when you go into these, when we say that there's 5, 6, or 7 sections, these aren't sections of 30 kids. These are small groups. And as Mr. Hoffman said, there's a wide variety of kids in there, and the teachers are able to pivot. So, they might be helping a kid with algebra for a couple minutes, and they're helping a couple kids with geometry, Algebra 2. And believe it or not, because we have so many kids that are high achievers, we even have some kids trying to sneak in, because they're getting ready for a calc test, and they want, that last, like, can you help me with this problem? So the rooms are, it's been very successful so far.
Right, is there anybody else? Dr. Davis, go ahead.
I just had a follow-up question regarding the walkthroughs. And I'm wondering, how do you determine the look-fors when you're going on those walkthroughs?
So each of the domains, each of the Danielson domains have a number of components. So we actually have the components. So student engagement, so we have the look-fors right on the form. So, we're looking for, of course, now I'm blanking. The look-fors are right on the document. Mr. Hoffman, can you give a real-life example? For example, one is in domain 3, I think it's component C, it's use of instructional time. So how is instructional time used? So are teachers in whole group instruction? Are they lecturing? Are there small group instruction? What does that small group instruction look like? How are the groups formed? So the walkthroughs are really transparent. They're never a gotcha.
Are teachers aware of what look-fors are going on at any given time? Are there times when a building may be focused on something specific that everybody's able to collaborate and talk about, like, what those look-fors are?
So Danielson has 4 domains. We focus our walkthroughs on domains 2 and 3, classroom environment and instruction. And among the 4 domains and the 22 components, we chose 10 power components that we believe are the most important. Inside of our walkthroughs, there are 6 components that we're looking for. Intentionally, sometimes even not intentionally, although everything Mr. Hoffman does is intentional, he tells me. When we build professional learning, that was a joke and no one laughed about it, but it's fine. I get it. I'm not hurt. But often our PLE is built around one of those components, one of those look-fors. So I see you shaking your head.
No, the only thing I would add to it is that also Dr. Yanni's specifically mentioning those formal, informal walkthroughs that we're doing. In terms of the 10 or 15-minute visits that we make as we're ongoing, Dr. Hamer will walk through Jarretttown looking during a math block, what does guided math look like? So it could be an instructional strategy that we're working through with collaboration. Mr. McAleer, we look at, guided reading for very specific purposes to see what those strategies look like and what the interventions for students look like. So it may be something very specific to one of those 10 power standards, or it may be something that we're doing with professional learning that we want to just see how it's going, or get some observations, noticings, wonderings.
I also just want to, again, thank all of our principals for being here this evening. It's really encouraging to hear you speak about your data and what's going on in your schools, because I do believe that principals as an instructional leader is the most important role that you have when we're looking at all kids achieving at high standards. So I really appreciate your presentations this evening. You provided a great deal of information for us to even, I went through it already, and now I feel like I want to go back again, and just really understand all of it. So thank you very much for what you shared this evening and for the role that you're playing in your schools.
Mark?
I have a question about, science and math, I see some language in the presentation and that you covered that sort of describes the pedagogical approach to these things. For science, we say we're committed to an inquiry and phenomena-based approach, and for math, prioritizing mathematical thinking over algorithms. And I'm not sure whether this is a question for Mr. Hoffman or Mr. Michener, but I'm wondering if are those really domain-specific ideas, or are they more general than that? For example, and I really mean this as an example, in science, you could easily prioritize mathematical, or the concept of mathematical thinking over algorithms. I have this set of data, so I can plug it into that formula and get out the answer without actually understanding the science. Is that commitment and priority that we're talking about in math, does it also apply to science, or right now, in the way we're applying it, is it really domain specific?
I think in terms of science, it depends upon what science we're doing and at what level, right? So when we have kids in life science, for example, at 7th grade, the beginnings of biology, right now, at least at this point of the year, we're focusing more heavily on inquiry-based science and understanding concepts. I think as we move into more complex sciences, future courses, I think it becomes less domain-specific. Does that answer your question, or no? No, I didn't answer his question.
Yeah, I don't think so. So I'll try again. Maybe Chris looks like he maybe has an answer for me.
So that's Sirota 1, Yanni 0 tonight. And we're not even in policy committee yet.
See, I'll take a shot at that. I think I don't think that they're necessarily domain specific. And for example, today we're at the IU looking at the science and engineering practices, and one of those practices is applying mathematical modeling and computation to predict outcomes in science and engineering. And so when we talk about almost last November or so, when we talked about a STEM mindset and how it really is an interdisciplinary approach and a way of tackling all subject areas. I think we're articulating that in math and science because they're two fields that can be delineated and almost predictive with formulas and things like that. And you can really pinpoint and memorize a lot more in science and math than you can, for example, in writing a paper or something like that. And so you're right, that these are interdisciplinary concepts. We're trying to narrow them down. The new science standards are going to help with that. The state is, I'll say, lacking a little bit in what they've provided so far as they've adopted the standards. But over the next 3 years as those roll out, I am excited to look at the cross-cutting concepts that do go beyond just science. They touch math, they touch all areas, really.
I'll just say what he said. I do think as the state is readopting standards and they're really starting with science, they're trying to get out of silos, so science for just science and math for just math. I think they're really trying to create this STEM approach and humanities approach.
Any other questions? Ms. Evans?
I've got a couple, sorry. First one, I'm channeling Art here. Do we know whether and when the participation requirements are going to come back?
So they alluded to the fact that they could come back as early as this year on the webinar yesterday. However, they acknowledged the fact that once parents and guardians have opted their kids out once, the likelihood is that they will continue to opt out their students in future years. And so the department has said, be prepared to be dinged on participation rate.
And can you remind me again, what is the ding?
So, that's not an easy question because every year the state changes the Future Ready Index. So we'll have a red mark next to participation. It will not affect funding, and I don't mean to laugh, but it's just funny that they feel the need to put a red mark next to participation instead of a green to say you met it or blue to say, that we exceeded it. So more districts than not will probably have red marks.
You mentioned earlier, and you took the words right out of my mouth, having, I think it was Faith, come to a meeting, because I think I asked this question when we approved the agreement with University of Delaware. I'm still trying to grasp what the illustrative math concept is. So to the extent she could come in, explain it more, I'm really interested in it. It's just, it's not a concept I'm familiar with, so that I love that idea. I had already written it down, so literally you read my mind.
Can I go back to your participation question for
Yes.
just a second? Yeah. There is a fear that if there is a legislative change, that kids who opt out will be counted as below basic. And so if non-participation is counted as below basic, that will absolutely skew our scores. So what we would have to do then, and this is easy to do, here's what the state says your scores are. We would have to just remove, not every below basic. Although I have to say, very, very few kids coming out of the pandemic scored below basic on any of the assessments. That scares me a little bit, but we would just have to remind our community that that would be the new norm. So we would just have to say how many kids would be extrapolated out of that data set.
And that would have an impact on funding?
Not on funding, but it could have, the state is going to start designating districts as targeted support. It could affect Title I numbers. It could affect Title I status. Really, the webinar yesterday was a lot of, we'll get back to you when we have greater answers. The state just submitted their revised ESSA plan to the Federal Department of Education. So a lot of it, we might not know what the status of those things are until April or May.
Okay. Is there any further breakdown that we can get on, because you touched on this a little bit, I think it was in the ELA section, about, there's specific, skills that are taught within each of those exams. Is there any further breakdown we can get to see, and is that going to be in that workbook?
It's not slated to be in the workbook. It's really fiction is where we need to do the majority of our work. 3rd and 4th grade and 7th grade is really what we need to do. And I think as we go through some curriculum revisions and in future presentations, we can show you what we're doing to help kids, to put kids in a better spot. I also think I want to give, Dr. Blankman has gotten a lot of shout outs, and I mean, it's great, we love her, but let's give someone else a shout out at this point. So I'll give a shout out to Ms. Vandergrift. Is she still here? She's still here. Brina has worked really well with our elementary teachers and now moving into the middle school on a writing continuum. Writing is thinking, and so the more we have kids writing about reading, it's like iron sharpens iron, right? And so particularly as we move from elementary school to middle school, the more we write about reading and we read about our writing, things are going to improve.
Do they give those kind of breakdowns, though, in other subject areas, so math, science? Okay, because I think that might be interesting just to see what are the categories of skills, if you will, that are being tested. And again, I'm sure you guys are looking this, but I'd be interested in seeing it. Where are our students struggling? Are there particular pockets of skills that are... If I can just give you some feedback on IXL, I've seen my middle schooler using it, particularly in ELA, and she actually really enjoyed. I like what I saw in IXL for what it's worth. It almost made they're practicing skills like pronouns and that, and it was almost like fun. So for what it's worth, I actually like that program. I haven't seen it yet firsthand for math, but at least for ELA, she seemed to like it. Last thing I had was, so I was kind of breaking my brain a little bit as we were sitting here trying to compare last year's data to this year's data. And there's probably all kinds of reasons why I shouldn't do that. But, can you speak at all about comparing last year? And I mean, I was looking at comparing, last year's grade 3 to this year's grade 3, but also looking at last year's grade 3 compared to this year's grade 4, because those are, are there any cautionary tales I should have before I keep breaking my brain with this?
Yes, you have to know which kids are in the cohort and which kids aren't. That's a good point, and you really are channeling your Dr. Levinowitz. Somewhere he's right now twitching. He doesn't know why, but what we see in our reports from Linkit is they group kids by which kids are in the cohort. So which kids have been here starting in grade 3 and up. Kids that have been with us year over year have about a 10%, their scores are on average about 10% higher than kids that come in. So when you just compare raw score to raw score, you can do that, but it tells it tells a more complete story when you see cohorts. So I'll make sure that gets in the data workbook.
Okay. Probably enough for now.
All right, thank you. Couple of comments I wanted to make. The first thing I think that comes out through this is the collaboration that goes on, which I think is something that we can't stress enough, because I think that's a huge difference in the last few years, and especially the last 2 or so. The collaboration across grade levels, but also the collaboration between special education and regular education, so that really kids do have continuity, and that it's not a matter in which who is your teacher, but that there's really consistency across grade levels. And I think that is a huge step forward, and I'm really, really hoping that we'll see the benefit of all of that in the years to come, not just on scores, but kids' interest and willingness and excitement about learning and well-being, because I think it's much bigger than the data and than the numbers we see here, even though that is helpful for us to see. So that, I think, is a really big take home for me from this presentation, and I think over the years we hopefully see more from that. One of the things that I also noticed was that was mentioned, and I want to hear a little bit more about, that students with IEPs and some disadvantaged cohorts had the greatest gains. What was done there, and how did you achieve that?
So we really enveloped our special education teachers into our professional learning last year. Yes, there are things that they need to do that are separate and apart from the regular education teachers, IEP writing and some things, but we're really bringing them into the fold, because if they're teaching replacement math in 4th grade and all of the regular education students are teaching Eureka, and our 4th grade kids in replacement are doing SACS and math, it's different language, it's different terminology, and there's no hope of getting those kids, when they've improved their skills, back in the general education curriculum. We might modify that general education curriculum, but they have access to it.
Yeah. All right, and then this whole concept of growth for all students, because I think when we're looking at this data, there is a tendency to look at students who are not quite at that proficient. But what are we doing for the kids who are proficient? What are we doing to make sure they continue to grow? Or the kids who are advanced, what are we doing to make sure they continue to grow? Because we don't want them to stand still. And I think that is something that I'm sure that you're thinking about that and doing something, but that it didn't really come out on this, and I'd just like to hear a little more.
No, that's part of our triad conversations with principals, because one of the things we struggled with as a district for years is so the state breaks down all of our kids into quintiles. So every year, that the highest quintile of kids have a hard time making that growth standard, because so many times we think, okay, they're good, but we have to keep pushing, we have to keep pushing, we have to keep pushing. And that's where some tools like iExcel, that's where having more integrated subjects, that's where getting away from just delivering a program, but looking at priority standards, that's where those common assessments come in. And also some pre-assessments. Why are we having kids sit for instruction when they've already demonstrated mastery of a concept, so that we can further their instruction along?
So do you see future in totally standards-based or concept-based assessments? And
I mean, at the risk of going out on a limb, I mean, I would love for us to see, better assessments, but that's a complete change, that's a complete paradigm shift, because one of the things, no matter what we do with our assessments internally, there are still the keystones and the PSSAs, and unfortunately, that's what we're graded on. But I think we can start moving our assessments to more concept-based curriculum. Lynn Erickson wrote a book, it's called Stirring the Heart and Soul Around Curriculum, and she talks about concept-based curriculum for all subjects. And when Mr. Hoffman talks about playlists and blended learning, what that really is, it's moving us towards concept-based curriculum, because it's giving kids opportunity to move at their pace and receive help when they need it. And I see he's pulling the microphone in.
I just think also the work we've done K-12 with our master schedules at each level has also supported us getting the right instruction in front of the kids at the right time. And I think looking also at the incorporation of WIN at elementary, ARP, and the revitalization of what that looks like, and office hours at the high school is allowing the full spectrum of students to get what's next and at the right time.
Then some specifics. If we go to slide number 5, can we do that? Yeah, I think that slide needs a little bit of explanation, because I don't want this to look like, oh, the state average for math is 36.8%, and the high school average is 21. We're way below. How can you explain a little bit more on that?
But that's what it is.
Okay, all right.
So
How many, but these are the students who are taking it for the first time? Because it says
first time is ninth graders.
first time as ninth graders. So these are the students who didn't take it in
the middle school. So
in the middle school,
when
right?
I look then, hang tight for 1 second. So when we look at high school, Algebra 1, 93.6% of kids that took the course, took the assessment, but we can add that information to the
Yeah, and can
to
you
the
put
slide
an
as well.
N with that? Because I think that is going to be an
I believe
important part.
it was fewer than 30 students, but we'll check
Well,
on that.
exactly. And I mean, we're talking about a very small group of students, whereas this looks like the high school math scores are not good. Now, if this is a group of 31 students for who probably or likely have struggled earlier on, and already, I mean, compared to the Sandy Run kids who were some of them accelerated or maybe even further accelerated, I think that needs a little bit more context, if that's possible.
I'm happy to do that. I just want to,
Yeah.
because I feel really strongly that the data is the data.
Yeah,
And
no, understood.
But even when we had 100 and some kids taking it, the average was rarely over 50%. So, I mean, we can add the end count, but I think we have to, like, the hard reality is that percentage is just completely unacceptable. But now, the way we're looking at data, the good thing is, now we know those kids didn't do well, so now we can actually drill down and say, did they not do well in the entire assessment, or was it one module or the other module? Because they don't have to retake the entire assessment.
Or are these kids who recently came to the district? Because
True.
that's another component of that, I think. Yes. You mentioned about writing about reading and writing about mathematics. Can you say a little bit more about that, especially the mathematics one?
So can kids, at least proficiently, explain their thinking in writing, so that, one of the struggles is if you can compute, but you can't explain how you got your answer. You can compute, but you don't have the requisite problem-solving skills. So one of the things, we've seen a lot more of an intentional focus around that, and we've seen some good improvement there. That improvement needs to continue, though, and that needs to remain a focus in all of our math courses, not just stopping at Algebra 1, but all the way through our math sequence.
Yeah, and sometimes it's the writing, sometimes it's just the verbalizing and the verbal component, right? I mean, I think the writing is just a piece of that. All right. And that sort of also gets to the science, elementary science, where we seem to be doing pretty well compared to, I mean, if we look at that in context of the math scores, the science definitely higher. Is that, even though there's a reading level issue potentially, I'm also wondering if the visualization component is huge in this, and that may also play a role in students' ability to access material.
Our students in 4th grade tend to do very well on the graphic representation standards. Interestingly enough, they do better on those standards in science than they do on math. So I wish I knew why that was. That's something that year over year I kind of scratch my head about, because the graphic representation questions are very similar between what's on the 4th grade science assessment and what's on the math assessment.
Right, I'm almost getting to the end, I think. Hold on, one more. Yeah, maybe not. Oh yes, high school. We have the math lab, we have the different math courses. It's probably a little too early to tell at this point, but how does office hours work? Does that help a lot of these students? What do you see in terms of usage of the office hours?
So I actually really appreciate the question. I had a cheat sheet in front of me and then kind of got on a roll when I was talking, so there are two things I left out. One is the new bell schedule has allowed opportunity in all of our classes to delve into, to spend more time with individual students in order to meet their needs. That's one. Number two, office hours has been fantastic. It's way too early to try to provide any kind of data in terms of how effective it's been, but beyond the brain break, beyond the social and emotional needs, the academic piece, you will regularly see a handful of students in every single classroom getting additional support on time as needed with their teacher in small groups, focusing on skill deficit as opposed to an entire topic. So I don't have a specific for you, but so far it's been really great.
No, but sort of more of an anecdotal first experience with this new schedule. I mean, I certainly hope that at a future meeting we'll hear a lot more about that.
And I just add anecdotally, in my conversations with high school students, I hear nothing but glowing reviews about office hours. I hear, and the thing that I really like about what I've heard, and this is not, a huge number of students, but it's a fair number, is that they're self-advocating in order to make it happen. And I think that is a huge component that too many students struggle with, and having that built-in opportunity to do it safely is really valuable. That's completely aside from the benefit they're getting of actually being there.
I appreciate that. And the focus of this presentation is on reading, writing, and science. But if you go down to the Performing Arts Center, if you look to see what's happening in the Black Box Theater, if you look to see what's happening in the band room, if you look to see what's happening in the art classrooms, not to mention world language and everything else, like it's been really, really good so far.
Yeah, so this is going to be an exciting presentation when we get there, right? Good. I think this is the end of our presentation. I again want to thank everybody who was here tonight, but also everybody who helped put this all together, because this is a lot of work, but it's also why everybody is here. So thank you very much. We will now move on to the committee reports and recommendations. So have a good evening and thanks again. All right, so since we don't have a quorum on the committee, I think we just, it's enough to bring these up, these educational placements and agreements, and ask if there's anything that you want to bring to the attention to the committee.
No, these are confidential agreements.
Yeah, so everything is good, and then we will bring those on in a legislative, well, I have an opportunity to discuss if necessary. And then the PSAT, the J, K, and L, is there anything you want to bring to the attention of the people here?
Mr. Hoffman, can you just speak briefly to I? Because
Yes.
it's the representational.
So I is a yearly motion that we bring to the board that just reviews our state assessments and any major assessments that are given along with the windows each year. Nothing new, just updated dates.
Okay, so nothing new, just updates of the dates. And J, anything on any J or K?
J is the PSAT for 10th and 11th grade again. That's a standard motion each year. K relates to I. So our school calendar, when we received the PSSA window for ELA for elementary, there was a conflict with our elementary conferences being the same week as the elementary and middle school conferences being the same week as PSSA, and we don't want to add 2 half-days to PSSA week, so we're proposing moving the early dismissal conference days from the 27th to 28th of April to the 20th and 21st of April.
Thank you. And then the conferences, I think what we see there is definitely an example of what we already discussed. Teachers going to a conference about how to get students, or talking about creating classrooms where students are excited to learn math. And this is throughout the district. There is not just the high school or the middle school. It is across the different grade levels and buildings. So I think that's really exciting.
Yep, it's K-12 math is under curriculum review right now. And so this is an opportunity for our elementary and high school teachers. Our middle school teachers have opted, due to the time that they're devoting with faith specifically in the University of Delaware, that they didn't want to lose a day with students. Not that attending the conference is losing a day, but they have that support that they need. But this is an opportunity. We have 2 of our curriculum leaders at the elementary, 2 of our ISS, and our Algebra 2 team representatives from the high school, along with our high school curriculum leader. Our Algebra 2 team will be later this year working with the illustrative coaches so that we can continue the illustrative math Algebra 2. And so this is an opportunity for them to start working through that and then carry this into professional learning turnaround.
And then I also want to note that both Dr. Levinowitz and Dr. Yanni are going to attend the PSA and PSBA State Leadership Conference, and I'm assuming you're both presenting?
We're presenting our story of the recovery efforts last year.
So that's a special event, and I think it's exciting that you're being asked to present there, despite the situation we found ourselves in. Ms. Iannetti, I think you had a comment.
Yeah, actually, it was on Kay about the revised school calendar. I know some teachers at Back to School Night will have you signing up for those conferences. So can you just reassure me that parents will get the message?
District communication at least twice, building communications multiple times through their Thursday communications. We'll also ask individual teachers to communicate it out as well.
Anything else? No? Then we can move to public participation. If there is anybody who wants to come to the microphone, as usual, state your name, where in the district you live.
Ginny Vitella Ambler. Dr. Yanni won't comment about Eureka, but I will. I'm glad to see that going away. I think our current 12th graders, which a couple of us have 12th graders, have been through more changes in curriculum and schedules than any other grade, and that's with COVID and a tornado aside. So it's nice to see that illustrative math, if it is as good as it sounds, that it's a good direction. My question, I have a question about number H, number H, it's been a long day. The service for the Foundation's Behavioral Health. I'm just curious about how many expected kids are in that, how many were in it last year, how much is the cost in the budget for that, and how much was the cost actual from last year? Just every other thing has a number in it, and that has no numbers, and you know how I like numbers. Standardized tests, I've always wondered, I wonder if we can market it better to get more participation, because to me, if we told people that it's important to take these, even though they're difficult and very difficult on some kids, but it really helps our district respond to where our kids need help or where they excel, and we can change curriculum, and I think it's important. I just think we can maybe present it differently. And also that it is a great life skill to know how to take a standardized test, right? Going forward, you have PSAT, SAT, ACT, LSATs, MCATs, the bar exam, the CPA exam. I mean, this is like, it continues on. And I think starting to learn how to take a standardized test is a great skill to learn, even though it's difficult on some kids. So I think that would help us. Also, math. Okay, so AL1, 22%, 8th grade, 37%. I just jotted down really quickly. Now you mentioned that I guess the high school number is low because that is only counting the people that would take AL1 for the first time in 9th grade. But I'd like to know what that number is when which I think Tichia touched on that would include all the students, right? Because aren't we supposed to bank the kids that took AL1 exam in 7th grade and 8th grade, and with the 9th graders? I'd just love to see that number too, and hopefully it looks better than that. But then when I look at 8th grade, why is that so low? Because that's really kids that are somewhat excelled, right? Because they're taking AL1 in 8th grade, which is at least 1 year excelled, I think, right? As opposed to the double excel, if I'm getting my years right, looking back at it. Anyway, so I'm just wondering why they're so low, what we're doing to change that, and if that really includes all those kids. And comparative data, which we have seen in the past, where we are comparing what 3rd grade did last year to what 3rd grade did this year, and also what those 3rd graders are doing now in 4th grade. That is a chart that we have seen and looked at in the past, and it is very informative, I think. I know things are weird because of COVID and all that stuff, but it'd be nice to get back to them. And I just have to say, shout out for office hours. absolutely, they love it. And they also, when they have other things to do, like if they have to meet a committee or they have to do something as a group, the kids are getting together. We had a media day during office hours in the building for our field hockey team. And so they're using it to actually meet together for maybe outside clubs and outside sports too. So beyond the educational part. So I agree. I love that in the schedule. Thank you very much. We just have to work on that early bus and missing the same period. Thank you.
All right, and Ms. Evans, there were no submissions, right? All right, then I'll close community input, or sorry, the public participation, and I'm gonna see if there are any comments.
I'll start backwards. Comparative data, we'll put that in the workbook, like we said earlier. And this presentation will be up on the website. So this presentation has all the strategies that we're doing to improve outcomes on all of these assessments. I think we need to change our terminology around algebra. We need to stop calling things, and we've said this to staff as well, stop calling things accelerated and double accelerated. We have 2 levels of math in every grade level. So 8th graders taking algebra is not considered the, what would have been considered the accelerated course before. Letter H, the behavioral health foundations, that's just an agreement to work with them. There's a cost menu plan at the end of that agreement. And if any of our students would need to take advantage of that through an educational agreement, that would come to the board for approval. As far as Eureka, I just want to be clear, I don't know that Eureka is definitely going to go away, but it is something we're looking at through the curriculum review cycle.
Yes, Mr. Sorda.
I just want to make another comment about Eureka. I know that there are a number of people who don't like it and don't like similar programs that are offered, similar approaches to teaching elementary math that are used elsewhere. But it is a massive improvement on what we had before. And I do think once we see enough students go through that process, by the time they get to high school, I do expect that we'll see fewer, and hope we see it in the data, I think we'll see fewer kids saying things like, I'm just not a math person, because it does teach mathematical concepts far better than the previous thing. And there was commentary in the presentation about algorithmic thinking versus mathematical thinking, and what Eureka and that whole suite of similar tools is all about is using a variety of algorithms to teach math. So it is using algorithms to teach concepts, and now we're talking about going the other way and getting straight to the concepts. But I don't think we could have made the jump straight to the concepts originally. I think it's an important intermediate step to look at teaching a variety of algorithms to teach the concepts before you can even get there in the first place. So I know there's a lot of discomfort with that teaching methodology, but I do think it is an important step.
Yeah, and I can't really resist here, but mathematical thinking encompasses all different ways of thinking. I mean, it can be algorithmic, but it can be problem solving and a whole bunch of other different approaches. So when we talk about mathematical thinking, I think we need to also address our vocabulary a little bit so we know what we're talking about. I think we perhaps should make that a goal to have a common language. That's all. All right, then I think, my screen just went very blank. Let me just wrap. I think we're at the end of the meeting, but yes, our next meeting is scheduled for November 2nd, so we have a short break. And I look forward at 6 p.m., and I look forward to seeing everybody there, and we'll adjourn the meeting. And we take a quick break and then move on to policy. Thank you.